November the 17th, 2016. In Loxahatchee, Florida, police receive a 911 call. A man has been stabbed, and his condition appears critical.
I need an ambulance right away. Somebody came in and stabbed my son, and he's bleeding, and he's almost unconscious. Please get him.
Ma'am, I have them on the way. I need you to calm down.
Those two blood vessels, the artery and vein, they are cut, so now the heart is still beating and blood is pumping out. So he's losing blood, he's bleeding out from his wounds.
He was stabbed some 7 times. The death blow was the clavicle or collarbone, which caused him to bleed to death.
As police launch an investigation, it becomes evident that this is no random incident. The attack is vicious and sustained.
Where is the person that stabbed him?
We don't know. The front door is open. They came in. I was sleeping, and his friend was over, and his friend woke up and found him stabbed.
Okay, how...
He's dying!
I thought I knew anger and hatred before, but that's when I really met that.
Loxahatchee is about 20 miles west of West Palm Beach. It's a rural community with many large houses on big plots of land. There's even a small safari park in the area. In general, it's a quiet area.
It is rural, large lot sizes, everything is it's called the acreage, so everything is an acre to more out there. It is slowly getting more and more developed, but it is more rural than, say, downtown West Palm Beach. You've got all types of people that live out there. It really is a melting pot. Business owners, small business owners, construction business owners, but single-family residences. You have people that live out there that just want more space. So it really is a melting pot of sort of everything out there.
A lot of people who enjoy nature tend to flock to Loxahatchee or the outdoors, such as hunting, but it's a rather quiet area, a little more far removed from the hustle and bustle.
But all of that changes on a November night in 2016.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
I need an ambulance right away. Somebody came in and stabbed my son, and he's bleeding.
Who came in and stabbed your son?
Right now, he's bleeding.
Okay, who is it?
It's my son.
The call has been made by Nicole Barry. Her son James is the victim.
She made the 911 call, but if you actually listen to the 911 call, you can hear everyone in the room is on the call. Essentially, she's the one who dials, but her live-in significant boyfriend, Guy Hand, is on the phone as well, speaking, and they're all just trying to give as much information, get as much information at the time.
You could just hear emotions running high. There was a lot of commotion in the background. Nicola just describing to the best of her ability the sequence of events and the dire need for help.
Where is he stabbed at?
He's stabbed in the shoulder.
Okay, how?
He's dying. Please, he's bleeding.
Sam, I have help on the way. SOU on the line?
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Knowing what's going on, I mean, what we know now, what was happening in the bedroom. So it's Nicola, Miss Barry, narrating what she's seeing and trying to listen to the 911 dispatcher to try to help her son at that point.
What is that vein, guy?
By his neck?
His jugular vein.
Okay. Did someone have a cloth to put pressure on?
Yes, we have pressure on it right now. Please get him.
It sort of became apparent throughout the call that, he was dying. So You definitely hear the panic in her voice and trying to do everything she can.
Is he breathing? You don't know?
I need to know if he's not breathing.
Hello, we need
okay. No, sir, I have them on the way. I need to know if he's unconscious, right?
He's unconscious, yes.
Is he breathing?
No, he's not breathing.
When the police arrive, they immediately seal off the house and tend to James Barry.
Palm Beach County Fire and Rescue and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. The paramedics arrived, but then the officers went in first to the home.
You enter in through the front door. The bedroom was down a small hallway off to the left.
You could see the blood was on the hallway walls, and so they could see that, and they enter the room and they see James bleeding, and they see Guy trying to provide aid.
At that time, Guy Hand still had James on the bed and was trying to perform CPR at that point.
Then they take over, and that's when they move James to the ground.
But it is too late. James Barry is already dead.
James Barry suffered 7 stab wounds. 7. One fatal blow to the chest, which severed 2 arteries. He also had a stab wound among those wounds to his lower left abdomen and his right thigh. There were also some wounds on his hands, which indicated that there was, in fact, a struggle involved.
Copious amount of blood in the bedroom itself, some cast-off spatter in the hallway. It would have been a very chaotic scene.
Forensic experts now examine the scene.
When crime scene investigators started gathering evidence, they saw a pink cell phone. They found some blood splatter, and of course they gathered that evidence well, and they found some linen garments as well.
Most telling was when the police came in, they saw the knife, a steak knife, covered in blood next to the kitchen sink, nowhere near the blood splatter and nowhere near the body.
This raises questions for the police.
Somebody was trying to clean the murder weapon, because the only reason you put a knife next to the kitchen sink is to wash it.
It transpires that this person is Guy Hand.
It is unusual to think, why would anyone want to touch a murder weapon? That has to run through your mind. Why would someone in their right mind go and move a knife when someone is bleeding? However, he claims that he just acted out of instinct. He needed to get it out of the way, get it to a place where it was just, he said, I'll put it on the counter. I don't want anyone else getting hurt. So his explanation was that he just kind of let instinct take over and he got it out of the room.
Yes, Guy Hand had blood on him, but given the scene and given what he was trying to do to save the life of James Barry, he should have had blood on him. In other words, it was not unexpected that he had blood on him.
James's body is then taken for autopsy. The body undergoes a standard procedure undertaken in every homicide.
You look for clues, you look for evidence, things that help you piece together what happened in the last moments of a person's life. And at that point, you move off to the medical examiner's building next door, which is where we actually have the morgue. And then the detective is there and the crime scene investigator is there. The body is brought in. It's in a sealed body bag so nobody can tamper with the body. And then the body seal is broken, opened up. Everything is photographed as is. Samples are taken for DNA, for example. There are bags on the hands to protect them from trace evidence or maintain the trace evidence that might be on the hand. And everything is photographed as is. Eventually, clothing and things like that are removed from the body. And the whole time I'm taking notes, a morgue tech is taking photographs with rulers and things like that. And then at some point, I look at the body as is and examine the injuries. You also have to clean off the skin as well because blood obliterates details on injuries. And then the second part, once we've done all that, and photo documented everything. The second part is where I take surgical instruments and I open the person up and look to see what's going on the inside.
In James's case, there were clear signs of a struggle.
There were defensive wounds on his hands, for example, where he's trying to protect himself from being stabbed, so he's got cuts in his fingers, cut across the back of the hand. He's got a superficial stab wound in his abdomen on the left side. He's got a stab wound in his thigh, a couple stabs in the back, and he's got a lethal stab wound on the left side of the chest. Quite big. It enters on the left side of his chest and comes across. This is from his perspective. And it cuts through two large blood vessels, a vein and an artery that are the size of a pencil. Those two blood vessels, the artery and vein, they are cut, so now the heart is still beating and blood is pumping out. So he's losing blood, he's bleeding out from his wounds, especially the one up here. But he's also collecting blood on the right side of his chest, and his lung is damaged too. So his blood fills up on the right side of the chest, it compresses the lungs, making it harder and harder for him to breathe. In addition, as the blood is collecting on the right side of his chest and compressing those lungs, it's pushing everything over into the left side, which then kinks the large blood vessels that come off the top of the heart, slowing down or cutting off the blood supply. So now nothing is being pumped to the brain. He's not getting enough oxygen to the brain, and he passes out at some point and just never wakes up again.
As the body of James Barry is being analysed, police begin to establish who had been in the house on the night he died.
The mother and the boyfriend, Guy Hand, were trying to sleep in the master bedroom. The friend and the deceased were in the same room playing video games. Something drew the attention of the deceased, who went out and came back bleeding and stabbed.
Guy Hand said that he woke up to commotion. He saw James in the bedroom bleeding profusely, and he jumped into action.
The attack on James Barry had been vicious and sustained. Detectives needed to find out who had killed him and what their motive might have been. In November 2016, police in Florida are trying to establish what had happened to James Barry on the evening he was murdered at his home in Loxahatchee, a rural area close to West Palm Beach. His autopsy attests to the violence of the assault on him.
James Barry suffered 7 stab wounds, 7. One fatal blow to the chest, which severed 2 arteries. He also had a stab wound among those wounds to his lower left abdomen and his right thigh. There were also some wounds on his hands, which indicated that there was, in fact, a struggle involved.
The attack on James had extinguished the life of a promising young man.
He was honestly your perfect son, your perfect brother, your perfect friend. He was a saint. He was just a person that you had to have just met. If he was still alive, it would be nice, because he really loved just life, and he loved nature, and he loved animals, and he loved gaming. I mean, gaming was his biggest thing, but he never caused trouble. He never snuck out. He never did drugs. He never drank. He went to college. He took care of my mother when she had breast cancer. He was really a good child.
During the initial interviews, James's family keep mentioning one person. Her name is Melanie Eam, and she had been James Barry's girlfriend.
Jim Barry, James's dad, was convinced that Melanie was to blame. He said, "She is the one who killed my son."
And there is evidence that Melanie had been on the scene that night.
When police responded to the scene and they conducted their surveillance, neighbors actually saw Melanie Eam's car speeding from the neighborhood after midnight. So there were reports that she was actually in the neighborhood that evening.
Their mutual love of gaming had brought them together.
He met her initially through gaming, and then they had one of their first dates at the South Florida Fairgrounds, and they found out they went to the same school.
She was pretty dynamic personality as far as her love for him was concerned. However, she was very quiet and calm by nature. Family members say she really didn't have that much to say. However, James's sister describes her as being quite possessive, to the point where she even wanted to take college classes with him and always needed to be with him.
To me now, when I look back, like, that was a red flag. Like, it's not normal for me to hear other couples having to take the same exact course with the same exact teacher. I mean, it's just not. I don't hear it every day.
But there was a rival for James's attention.
I do remember that she had issues too with James's friends, and particularly there was one that she had a really big problem with.
The person in question was James's best friend, Jeff Jarzabkowski.
Melanie was very jealous of Jeff's relationship with James, their friendship. She did not appreciate, and she was jealous of circumstances when James would hang out and take time away from her spending with Jeff. So at the time of the incident, they would not socialize, the three of them, James, Melanie, and Jeff together.
James and Jeff had been friends since childhood. They both lived under the same roof with James's mother.
Jeff, who was James's best friend, let investigators know that he had learned about an hour before the murder that James was, in fact, going to call off this relationship with Melanie E.M. It was a tumultuous relationship, an on-off-again relationship, and at this point, James told Jeff that he was ready to call it quits on this relationship. This was about an hour before the murder happened. Jeff shared that with investigators.
As detectives start to gather more information, they discover that it wasn't the first time James had been looking to end the relationship.
He had tried to break up with her before, and she would get jealous or angry or frustrated or just in denial about the fact that he was going to break up. Melanie felt that Jeff encouraged James to break up with her. So in response, at the time, Jeff had a very expensive fish tank with fish in it. And at that time, Melanie poured bleach into the fish tank, killing the fish as well as destroying Jeff's property.
She saw an opportunity to get him out of the house, and how to do that. She had to pour the bleach in the fish tank, and then from what my mother said, she didn't admit to it till 2 days later after the fact, with no regard, and with no emotion, no, I'm sorry, but I did it.
That kind of goes hand in hand with just her volatile nature and sort of irrational actions when she gets angry.
They had broken up one time before, and Melanie just lost it to the point where she became suicidal, according to her parents. In fact, her mom went to James's house begging him and begging his family to not end the relationship, that she quite honestly couldn't handle it, and they didn't know if she would survive the breakup.
James was a kind soul and did not want her to inflict any harm on herself, so he agreed to get back in a relationship.
It appears Melanie had firmly embedded herself into James's world.
Melanie Eam really enjoyed the nicer lifestyle that being with James's family afforded her. She could go on family vacations. When she was with the family, she enjoyed time in their home. She would even use their kitchen. She would bake. She liked the lifestyle that James Berry and his family had to offer her. And she didn't want to give that up, not at any cost.
The evidence was that she really wanted to be a part of that family. And if you look at the situation that James had, I mean, he was in a very loving household. He had a great friend. He had transportation, both parents, a mother and a stepfather that cared very deeply for him, and really spoke to Melanie Eam not being a part of that anymore. So not only was it just James, I mean, she obviously wanted to be with James, but it was not being part of the family. And so I think that hurt her very, very deeply. And that's what I think she held on to. And I think she also saw Jeff as a little bit of a threat to that. Anybody that was with James when she wasn't with James, I think was a threat to that. If you look at the photographs of the two of them, just the still photographs, you'd look at it and go, look, they look like such a cute couple. And I think she feared losing all of that to a breakup.
Police now begin to look at a specific piece of evidence taken from the crime scene.
She left a piece of evidence behind at the home that was of paramount importance, and that would have been her cell phone that we ultimately did a cell phone extraction from, and that was a key piece of evidence that really implicated her as a person that we should be looking at.
On the night of November the 16th, James decides to end his relationship with Melanie.
He had told my father that night that he broke up with Melanie, and one of the last messages that he wrote is, "It's going to hurt a lot."
It was done through a third-party app, a gaming app called League of Legends. So we had to actually get into the physical device, the physical phone, and go into the third-party app to find those conversations. And really what it was evidence of James telling Melanie that he felt that they should go their separate ways. You could tell that he was childlike in his ability to sort of communicate his feelings. She seemed very angry, one, that they were breaking up at all, and two, she seemed angry that it was being done in that fashion via a League of Legends chat. And at one point she said, "I can't believe you're breaking up with me over a League chat." And his reply to that was, "Well, I talk to you in person, I just communicate better like this." It was a good 4 or 5 pages, screenshots of the conversation, so the breakup was clear. And that breakup terminated, and the last message was approximately 9:08 p.m.
It's November 2016. Following a relationship breakup via text message between Melanie Eam and James Barry, Melanie travels to James's house to confront him.
She went to the house. There was no sign of a break-in. One of the things that we certainly looked for was there any windows broken, doors jimmied, anything like that. And it would seem to indicate that she went there most likely to speak to James about the breakup, that she was let in voluntarily, and that then an argument ensued, and ultimately she acted out of spite, out of ill will, unhappy with the response that she got, and she reacted.
She came over to the home, and he continued to have his position that this relationship would not last and that he was breaking up with her. And I think she picked up a knife and decided that if he wasn't going to be with her, she was going to kill him. And that's what she did. I think she was angry and frustrated and stabbed him and stabbed him and stabbed him.
Because her phone was found on scene, it would certainly indicate that she was present in the home. The blood and the spatter and the cast-off would sort of indicate that prior to his death that there was an altercation in the hallway. So everything was sort of pointed at it. There was an argument, there was a confrontation, and that maybe that confrontation had gone sour.
As James lies dying on the floor of the house, Melanie flees the scene.
One of the other things police officers did that night is they located surveillance video, and it was consistent with Miss Eam's vehicle, her white vehicle, in the area, and arrived in the area around 12:25, and then leaves 27 minutes later at 12:52. So they were able to determine, yes, we believe that Miss Eam was here. Her parents don't know where she is. She would have access to the home, familiarity with the home. James might have let her in. So at that point, she became more of a focal point, but no one knew where she was.
Detectives are about to start the search for Melanie Eam when they receive vital information as to her whereabouts.
The very next day, investigators figured out where Melanie was, and in fact, she had fled north to Maryland. She was with her family in the Silver Springs area.
She ends up at a cousin's house, a gentleman by the name of Monk, who Monk ultimately calls the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, Detective Oliver, and notifies Detective Oliver where Miss Eam is.
They go and they make contact with her. And when they make contact with her, they don't know anything about the facts and circumstances of the case. So they make a welfare check to, confirm that she's there, so that Detective Oliver will fly up there if she actually is there. And so they make contact with her and they say, "Oh, are you Melanie Eam?" Because at this point, her parents still have not heard from her.
Hi, Melanie. We got called to make sure that you were okay.
He had the cameras rolling on his body cam. He went to the scene just to do a welfare check. When he went there, he made it clear to Melanie that she was not under arrest. He didn't want her to leave, of course, but he made it clear that he was not there to necessarily take her into custody, but rather he was there to ask some important questions.
Any other questions for us? What's going on, Melanie?
I'm scared.
Okay. What are you scared about?
She instantly started to cry. There was a showing of maybe instant remorse or sadness, or however you want to interpret it. But she started to cry. She was very emotional, and then, but the officers were not there to interrogate her. The two officers that were on the body cams, we're just here to make sure you're okay. You're not going to hurt yourself, because it was obviously she knew what she had done. Without any prompting or without any interrogation, she said, when should I come in for the questioning? Which would indicate that, one, she knows exactly why they're there and knows that she's going to be questioned about this.
I'm just wondering, when should I go in for the questioning?
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, we haven't been told anything. Like I said, they just wanted us to talk to you about, make sure physically and emotionally you were fine is all.
She knows she's guilty, and it's expressed with how she asks.
400, I'm direct. I'm going to head that way till I hear further.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hold on, we just made a check.
So we'll come back and knock on your door, Monkey.
She was like a small young lady, a very nice small young lady. It was almost difficult, to look at her and go, wow, you really did this.
Within 24 hours, West Palm Beach Sheriff's investigators have Detective Sean Oliver on the scene.
Detective Oliver with the sheriff's office immediately flies up to Maryland the day after the homicide, immediately after he's notified, and he makes contact with the police agency there. At first, they conduct some surveillance to see if she's actually at the home, see if they see anyone come out. They locate the vehicle that Miss Eam had, and immediately as he gets there, she has not left the home. She's still at the home. The car is still at the home. So he walks up and he makes contact with her, introduces himself, and speaks with her.
You need your side of the story because we have other sides of the story. Do you understand? Basically, everything shows that you just drove over there with the intention of killing James, which is really bad. But if it's something like heat of the moment, passion, you were trying to defend yourself, this is your opportunity because you're not going to get another opportunity.
Would I be provided with the lawyer before I say anything?
Are you going to be? We're not going to provide you with one. You're just going to come to the station and talk to me.
We're just going to talk to you. We're going to bring you right back. You're not under arrest.
Detectives, they were asking questions, and Melanie was obviously distraught. She kept saying, he broke up with me, I didn't mean to do it. So it turned out to be a confession.
Did you go over there with the intention of hurting James?
No, sir.
Okay, so it just happened, I'm assuming, is that right? You didn't do it on purpose. You didn't go over there armed with that knife, because I know that knife was there when you got there. You didn't take it with you, right?
No.
When asked how many times she stabbed him, she said she didn't know. She didn't keep count.
I'm not like that.
I'm looking at you right now.
I've never been violent. I've never done anything violent before.
What was said in that statement, took her out of just being an observer to the actual perpetrator who killed James.
She was not arrested that night. She was allowed to stay in her home. At any point in time during the interview, she could have ended it. She could have asked him to leave. She could have stopped speaking to them. But instead, she participated in the interview and even got her clothing from downstairs in the basement.
However, the police seize Melanie's car.
Not only could it be a mode of transportation for her to get away, it is also something that could be evidence. The car was at the scene. It could be compared to the surveillance video and attributed in that way. It could also have blood in it. It could have evidence, additional evidence that could assist in the case.
Melanie Eam is extradited out of the state of Maryland and back to Palm Beach.
Detective Oliver, after he had the conversation with Melanie and he left, he then worked on, based on the information he'd already learned and then the information from Melanie's statement, he generated a probable cause affidavit and he got a warrant for her arrest. And he had that executed the next day in Maryland.
When police were taking Melanie back to Florida, she showed very little emotion. Really no emotion to speak of.
She remained in custody until the time of her trial.
Now she will face trial for the murder of her ex-boyfriend. It's 2018. In West Palm Beach, Florida, Melanie Eam, accused of killing her ex-boyfriend shortly after he broke up with her and then fleeing the state, is about to go on trial.
Oh no, I'm scared.
Okay.
She didn't have a criminal history, which is, in our court system, evidence of character is almost never relevant. The only thing that could be relevant is a possible criminal history if she were to take the stand and testify. Given that we were most likely going to play this statement for the jury because we wanted the jury to hear the tone, wanted to hear the nature of her voice, when that happens, the likelihood of her actually taking the stand is very, very low probability. We didn't believe that her attorney would advise her. I mean, ultimately it's her decision about whether or not to testify, but his defense really could be, he could put on his defense without subjecting her to a rigorous cross-examination. Just given her soft-spoken nature, she probably would not have held up well under a rigorous cross-examination, and she would have had to contradict everything she had already told Detective Oliver. So, from that standpoint, we really had what we needed without doing too much more, research into, what makes her tick, so to speak.
But the prosecution case hangs on just one thing.
The only real proof that they had to prove this murder case was the confession and the blouse. So I wrote a motion to suppress that her rights had been violated, and the confession and the blouse were what we call fruits of the poisonous tree and should not be used. So I went to the state attorney and said, why don't we agree that this is dispositive? If I win the motion to suppress, you have no case. If I lose it, she's going to be convicted. Well, the assistant state attorney would not agree to it being dispositive. Why was that relevant? Because you cannot plead guilty and appeal an issue. The only thing you can do under the law is you can plead no contest or nolo contendere and reserve the right to appeal. You can only do that if the state agrees it's dispositive. The state refused. The only way that we could appeal the judge's denial of the suppression motion, the judge letting in the confession and the shirt, was to go to trial.
Melanie Eam now has to face the full pressure of a public trial.
Our focus 100% is on what does the evidence say and what admissible evidence do we have, and we try not to get bogged down in too many of just speculation, things like that.
Because we had the delay of her being brought to Maryland, I went to first appearances, and for homicides, it's not that arduous of a hearing because I'm just asking that she be held no bond. She had committed a murder. She had fled immediately after. No bond is very reasonable based on the circumstances. So I asked for her to be held no bond, but I also had the opportunity to meet the family. The family was all present at the hearing, and I introduced myself and met the family, was able to explain a little bit about how the process would go and then the circumstances of the case to them.
We want the jury to hear our story and our theme at that point and really paint the picture for them, which in our opinion, the theme of this case was, sort of the tale as old as time, that this is a love gone sideways, this is, an angry person, and really show all the reasons why we believe that Melanie Eam had the motive to be angry, why she was the only one who would have had a reason to even be, to be confrontational with James, that nobody else, the evidence didn't point to anybody else in the house. And that's what we do. We outline for the jury in our opening statement.
Melanie's statement that she had killed James seems to be sufficient evidence of her guilt.
I absolutely knew. I knew that once I knew that in general, when a defendant makes a confession, when they make admissions like that, it is common for, if there's any way, for the defense to try to suppress those statements because they were such a strength to my case.
But despite this, the defense still questioned the role of James's mother's partner in the whole affair.
I don't have to come up with a defense. The state has 100% burden to prove the case. But several things stuck out like a sore thumb. One was why Guy Hand, the mother's boyfriend, 10 years certified in CPR, would take this bleeding young man from the floor, a hard, flat surface, to a bed, which is a mattress. He even testified in trial that as he's doing the pumping of the CPR, there's blood spurting out. That was one thing that didn't make much sense. Another thing which didn't make much sense was that Guy Hand, upon questioning, admitted to picking up the murder weapon, the steak knife, he was a butcher, the steak knife, and taking it to the kitchen sink. Why?
The fact was the knife was moved. There's no disputing that. I think that the defense is doing everything they can to be as effective as possible and to question a person there as to why they would move a knife. I think it's a fair question.
One of the defense's main arguments is that Melanie had originally asked if she needed a lawyer when detectives first spoke to her in Maryland.
The defense attorney filed the motion to preclude the statement, not only based on the fact that she had used the word lawyer, but he also tried to argue that it had been a custodial interview because she was surrounded by surveillance officers in her neighborhood. At the time, Maryland had assisted in setting up, Silver Springs had set up different surveillance teams, unmarked cars, ununiformed officers that were just watching and surveilling so that they could provide Detective Oliver, should she leave, location of where she went, just so that he would know where to meet her because he was en route from Florida. The defense attorney tried to argue that she was being confined. And so I had to present evidence and testimony from those Silver Spring officers, have them fly here and testify that they were under no direction to arrest her. Their job was simply to see where she was, take any pictures of if she exited the home, make sure that the vehicle was the vehicle that they were looking for, all of those things. So I had to go not only just based on the contents of the statement, which I argued, just based on her mannerisms, what was actually said, that she was not asking for an attorney, and that it was a willing interview. And I also utilized the fact that the surveillance team she wasn't even aware that they were there. They never made contact with her. And even if she had left, they weren't going to follow her.
For the prosecution, the case is very straightforward.
The fact of the matter is that Melanie Eam had gone through a breakup. We had actual physical evidence of that. We knew that for a fact. We knew for a fact that Melanie Eam had fled the state of Florida. We knew for a fact that she had confessed to Sean Oliver. When you put the whole picture together, everything pointed at Melanie Eam, and nothing besides speculation pointed to Guy Hand.
As both sides wait for a verdict, there is tension in the air.
You're always nervous because you don't know what a jury will do, but I felt strong about our evidence and our case and how the jury would respond to that.
And when the jury walks out, I mean, it's butterflies. You're anxious. You're on pins and needles. You can see the verdict move from the foreperson's hand to the bailiff to the judge. The judge is reviewing the verdict. You're trying to read the judge for any tell that he's going to give away. And when the clerk stands up and reads the verdict, that's the most alive you're going to feel. If you ever lose that, I tell the younger attorneys, if you ever lose that, it's time to go.
The judge understood and sentenced her to 50 years, which is, a significant amount of time, and I felt that he was not persuaded by her explanation.
Melanie Eam gets to spend a significant amount of the rest of her life behind bars. But does her sentencing and incarceration bring closure for anyone?
Her parents actually came up to my father, my mother, and I, and my grandma. And this is rare. This doesn't happen all the time. But they apologized for what happened. And they told us that they loved my brother and that they're so sorry. And the father wasn't there a lot growing up with her. He felt the need to tell us that he was always working and whatever. And there's a little bit of a language barrier too, but it was brief. But I will say that moment of hearing that from her family, it helped me a little bit just to kind of move on kind of thing, It was a powerful moment in our life with this horrific thing. It's a life sentence for us. It is. But I would like, if it's genuine, it would be more healing to me to see her want to improve herself and to make amends and to own what she did. To me, that's more of a healing part of this horrific thing that has happened in our life, It's too soon for me to know.
October 12, 2016, Newcastle, England. A young woman is brutally murdered inside her home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom.
Police respond to the scene and a murder investigation is launched. It becomes apparent that the victim has previously been in contact with the police.
You could hear in that call the sheer terror in her voice.
It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times and he never does seem to stop.
Police immediately identify the victim's ex-boyfriend as someone they would like to interview.
Every case of murder is terrible, but this is one that will live with me for my entire life. I've never encountered a case with a defendant so callous and manipulative.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over.
If he couldn't have her, nobody could.
This is the heart-rending story of Alice Ruggles, how her killer's escalating behaviour should have raised red flags, and how tragically her death could have been avoided.
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
This is the worst stalking case that I have come across. there's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Christmas Eve 1991, Leicestershire. Alice, a beautiful baby girl, is born to Clive Ruggles and Sue Hill.
We live in a small village in Leicestershire. It's called Langton. There's only about 150 people live here. We've lived here since all our children were born. We were a close-knit family. We had 4 children, and Alice was the third of our 4 children.
Alice was bubbly, cheerful. She wanted to be everybody's friend, and when she was a young teenager, she was the person everybody wanted to be friends with, and so she'd walk in the room and she just attracted people, and she just was very, very happy.
She always had this incredible empathy. I can remember that even from a fairly young age. She'd sort of work out how you were thinking and what you were thinking, and if you were depressed or something. And she'd, if she detected that, she'd come out with some ridiculous joke or anecdote. She'd always be trying to cheer you up. And she'd succeed. And she became one of those people who would lighten things, and she would come into a room full of people and there was a bit of an atmosphere. She'd just get everyone going and laughing. So she had a real talent. Empathetic was the word. Alice was very close to her elder sister Emma. They would do many things together as sisters do. They had different interests, and Emma was always very good at sport, and Alice always liked sport, but she struggled to find a sport that Emma wasn't inherently better at. And she eventually found that. She went on a PGL course when she was about 11, I think, from school, and discovered fencing. And Emma had tried it once and hated it. And I think that may have been a motivation for Alice, but whatever. But she actually got really, really good at fencing, and she started to train, and she became eventually a member of the East Midlands squad, youth squad, and would travel around doing fencing matches.
She absolutely loved fencing, and she decided that was going to be her thing. After a couple of years, she was the Leicester champion for her age, and she won the competition for that. A couple of years later, she won the adult competition for Leicestershire as well. She was also the East Midlands champion for a long time as well, so she's quite successful at it. And it was such an important thing in her life that was how she chose where to go to university. So instead of looking at where does the course I want to do best, she was looking at where does the course I want to do, but also has a very, very good fencing club. And that is why she ended up at Northumbria University in Newcastle.
When Alice decided to go to university, she was influenced in, I think, where she was going with a degree. She was in a family with kind of scientific engineering side. In fact, most of our others landed up in different fields of engineering, effectively. Alice decided, because she also had this artistic flair, she decided that she was going to do a degree in product design, which sort of mixes soft engineering with the sort of artistic design side. But once she got to Newcastle, she discovered that she loved the place. And so she did her 4 years of her degree there. But when she finished, she decided that Newcastle was somewhere she wanted to stay.
She then got a job with Sky working on the telephone, so her job was to pick up the phone and try and persuade you that actually you didn't want to cancel your subscription. You actually wanted to subscribe to Sky Sports and Movies Plus or all the other things that you needed to do. And she did enjoy that job too, because overall Alice was a people person. She loved talking to people and getting to know them and being with them. Alice was very happy. It was interesting because she liked to be in a relationship with someone, and when she was working at Sky, she wasn't in a relationship with anyone, but she was totally happy with how she was, and that was a really good sign that the job was right for her, because it didn't matter that she wasn't in a relationship. It just meant that she could get on with life. You know, at one point we're sort of seeing it that she's at the absolute peak of her life because everything's going well. She's really happy, her job's going well, she's got a lovely flat, she's sharing with some people she likes, she's got so many friends that she just was really happy.
She always loved the idea of travelling, and she got the opportunity in 2015. A friend of hers, Jen, was planning a trip to Sri Lanka. So she spent these 2 weeks in Sri Lanka with Jen. And she absolutely loved it. And they had a lovely time. And of course, being of their age and generation, they were sharing pictures and other things on social media. Now, Jen had a friend at university who still followed her on social media, and his name was Truman Dillon. But he messaged Jen to say, "Oh, I've seen your friend, and could you put her in touch with me?"
He was looking at the Facebook photographs that Jen posted on the holiday, and he messaged her and said that the girl she was with was the most naturally beautiful person he'd seen, and could they introduce them? And at the time, Dylan was a serving soldier, and he was actually in Afghanistan on a non-combat role. I thought that this was someone Alice had met and was actually seeing quite a lot of, but in fact, Alice hadn't met him. And this happened in October, where they started talking on Facebook, and they got on really well and chatted a lot. And he was obviously quite lonely because he was a soldier serving abroad, and so it was nice for him to chat to Alice.
When Alice came home for Christmas that year, we got the impression that he was a boyfriend, the way she talked about him. What we didn't realise, that she'd never actually ever met him.
Alice and Dylan's relationship accelerates quickly, and there are troubling signs.
The relationship is becoming very intense very quickly, bearing in mind they've never physically met in person.
It wasn't until January that they actually met face to face, and yet by December, Alice had changed her Facebook status from being single to being in a relationship.
Christmas Eve was Alice's birthday, and even on her birthday she was concerned about staying in touch with him, and I think he sent her a couple of messages about seeing other people, which upset her rather.
And I remember her saying, I said to her, you know, "Where's Jen? Have you seen Jen recently?" And she said, "Oh, I'm not friends with Jen anymore." She said, "We had an argument." She said, "Harry says I must never speak to her again." And that rang a massive alarm bell for me, that, you know, that's not right at all, that someone should tell you who you can be friends with. What I didn't realise was that Dylan had actually engineered the argument between them, and he'd fuelled it, and it was a really effective way of isolating her from her friends.
January 2016, Newcastle, England. Online daters Alice Ruggles and Truman Dillon meet for the first time in their 3-month relationship. Dylan is on leave from his army tour in Afghanistan.
He came down to Newcastle and stayed with Alice for a week, and she said they had an absolutely wonderful time, and that he was lovely, and he took her out, and he was very gentlemanly, and he paid for things. And then they had a week in Edinburgh, and they had a lovely time there as well. They saw all the sights of Edinburgh, where Alice had never been before, and it was a lovely time.
Certainly after they'd spent those 2 weeks together in January, I think she was besotted with him.
Alice rang me at that time and said, "Mum, he's just amazing. I actually think he is the one."
When Dylan finishes his tour in Afghanistan a few months later, Alice brings him to meet her parents.
We first met him together with Alice. It was on the Maybank holiday weekend. You know, he was a personable enough lad.
Truman had been brought up in India. He was of a Sikh background.
He was an only child. He talked about there being servants to the family, so they're obviously reasonably affluent. But he also talked about how spoiled he was. And he did say, "I always get my own way. I always get whatever I want." He was obviously quite westernised because his Indian accent was barely present, and I was actually quite surprised to discover he actually was Indian because he just sounded like he'd lived in Britain all his life.
He was at university, I think, in India, then finished 2 years of his university education in the UK, in Edinburgh.
He joined up with the British Army because that was the only way that he could stay in Britain.
This clean-cut image, this is somebody who's got a responsible job. He's ticking all the boxes in terms of his career, notwithstanding his occupation and his background, you know, in terms of how he is with Alice, the positive comments, the praise. This is a good, decent person.
I remember when he left the house that we both said to each other, "What do you think then?" And Clive said, yeah, he was just trying to say what he wanted us to hear. And that was really good description of what he was like, in the sense that he just wanted us to think he was going to look after Alice and he was going to be kind and nice to her.
That first weekend, everything was fine, but they came down again for the second bank holiday weekend. And by that time, only 3 or 4 weeks later, things seemed to have changed a little bit. And it was odd because I remember the fact that he spent an awful lot of time trying to buy a car on his phone and basically ignoring her. And she was visibly upset by that. That, I suppose, was the first sign that there's something not quite right here, because he wasn't giving her the attention that you'd think he would, especially in front of her parents. He just seemed to be kind of absorbed in his own thing.
As the relationship continues, Dylan's behaviour becomes more cruel.
He'd quite often make not very nice comments about her, so comments about the fact that she had a big nose and that she had hairy arms and all sort of things that he was really trying to undermine her confidence.
They're spending all their time together, and friends and family have noticed that Alice isn't sort of available in the same way that she was previously, not going out unless they're together. Things weren't as happy as they perhaps should have been or were initially. They're using each other's devices, tablets, phones, you know, so he has access to Alice's iPad or tablet or phone, and of course any accounts that are on there legitimately at the time.
Dylan's behaviour is becoming increasingly more jealous and controlling.
I remember Alice saying, "Mum, he rings me up every morning and he wants me to send a photograph so he can see what I'm wearing. And that sounds lovely and caring." And that was how Alice saw it. She'd message him from a party and saying, "I'm at a party, you know, it's really lovely." And then he'd come and pick her up and she said, "Mum, it's really lovely, he just wants to see me. He's just come down, driven all this way from Edinburgh to see me." And so when you're in a controlling relationship, it's quite hard to see that. It's quite hard to think, actually, I'm being controlled here. Dylan said to Alice, he said, "Don't worry, I've got some money. I'll buy a flat that you can live in." And this was another worry for me, because in my mind, they'd only just started this relationship, and there's something wrong with someone saying, "I'm going to buy a flat for you to live in." It just didn't sound right at all. But fortunately, Alice found somewhere to live with a friend from work, and so she didn't end up living in his flat under his control.
A good way to describe his behaviour is one of possession. And of course, you don't possess people, you possess objects. And when we start to see those signs that somebody is becoming dehumanised, I own you, you are a possession, you are chattel. It starts to open up those ideas about power, control, ownership. We start to see this bind being created in a relationship where people's vulnerabilities, their niceness, their good nature is sort of used against them in the most abhorrent way. And we start to see those signs, changes in Alice's behaviour, arguing with her friends, falling out, losing weight, not being this happy person that she previously was. Something is going wrong here.
It's difficult as our family, because when we look at Alice, we don't see someone who's controlled. We see a really strong, independent, lovely, bubbly person. How can that person have been controlled? And it's really hard to accept that that might have happened to her.
It's hard to conceive how affected someone must feel in that situation. I mean, every moment of your life, in every different way, this other person either knows where you are, who you're with, or they might know. I mean, this is now controlling your entire life, and that's how it was for Alice.
24-year-old Alice Ruggles is in a relationship with Treman Dillon. The couple visit Alice's family in Cornwall, and Alice reveals that Dillon has been keeping secrets.
The family have a history, long-standing tradition of going on holiday, I think, to Cornwall.
Alice had decided she'd had enough of him before that holiday started. And the reason is that Alice had a message on Facebook from somebody who she didn't know, who said, there's something about your boyfriend you need to know, and that he's been on Tinder and he's looking for other girls, and he found me and he wanted to go in a relationship with me. So I looked at his Facebook and I found that he was in a relationship with you, and you need to know that that's what he's doing.
She had found out that he was speaking to other girls using dating apps and Facebook because somebody contacted Alice. By the way, I've seen that you're in a relationship with this person, and FYI, he's been contacting me.
And Alice tackled him about it, and he first of all denied it completely, and then he said, oh, somebody else had set up a fake account. His story had changed again, and he knew exactly who it was, and he'd done it because he didn't like Alice and he wanted to cause a rift between him and Alice. And I remember Alice saying, I don't think he actually knows what the truth is, Mum. I don't think he even knows what the concept of truth is. He just says whatever he thinks you want to hear at that point.
Alice did end the relationship. That was the line that was crossed, if you like. But this wasn't a clean, amicable break. This was anything but.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over. He basically messaged her all the time. So her phone would be buzzing and then buzzing again and then buzzing again.
It was relentless. It was constant.
Dillon at this point has been rejected. And to somebody like him, a narcissist, rejection is hugely insulting.
Dillon is stalking Alice online, and given his knowledge of her conversations, she believes he's hacking her social media.
He did pretty much had unfettered access to her Facebook. I think he also had access to WhatsApp through the web-based service as well. So he's privy to who Alice is communicating with. He's privy to conversations between Alice and her mum, Sue, via WhatsApp. And of course, they're discussing things, her thoughts, her feelings, and also her other online activity. Who is she looking at on Facebook? Who's she communicating with? And actually, she is speaking to another male on Facebook.
Alice had been starting a new relationship with a man called Mike, who was a colleague of her sister's.
And almost instantly, Dillon found out about this, and Alice had told nobody about it. She'd only talked to Emma about it. So how did Dillon know?
He says, I know you belong to another man now. So it's a very clear sign that he has dehumanized Alice. Mike knows everything. Alice, has explained the situation, and when Dillon contacts him saying that Alice is cheating on him, it tells you something very clear about what he thinks. This is far from over.
Alice's new relationship is another trigger, and Dillon's behaviour escalates again.
It was Emma, more than any of us, who began to think of this as stalking. We didn't know about the level of danger that was involved in this. We, like Alice, assumed that at some point he would just give up and move on and go away. As soon as the control within the relationship is broken because the relationship is ended, then the perpetrator needs to exert that control in other ways. It's a trigger that actually makes the need for control worse. And of course, then the stalking is an attempt to regain that control.
Alice has never been in a situation like this before. She tries to be reasonable. She tries to be nice, to let somebody down gently, to appease them. But that isn't working. Dylan had in his possession intimate photographs of Alice and used these as a way to threaten her. This is to coerce her, to blackmail her, if you like, back into a relationship. If you don't get back with me, I will publish these images. All your friends and family will see the type of person you are. Now, for Alice, who's got loads of friends on social media, for private images like that to be published would have been devastating.
Dylan's sinister behaviour continues when he deliberately scares Alice when she is home alone.
On the 30th of September, Alice is having a night in. She's not going out with her friends. She gets a weird phone call from him telling her that he's in the garden. And Alice said, "What, my garden?" And he said, no, some gardens in Edinburgh that they'd visited. And Alice thought that was really strange. And then a little bit later, the doorbell rang. And when she went to look, there was nobody there. And that kept happening. And she was really, really unnerved at this point. And she's been quite anxious about locking the flat, making sure all the windows are shut for quite a long time because of the way he's been behaving. Eventually, she goes to bed, and when she goes to bed, she hears this knocking on the window. And so she opens the curtains, and he's standing there having put some flowers and chocolates on the windowsill, and he's stepping back from the window.
During that journey home, he leaves a message for Alice, which is to a phone, a voicemail, in which he says he just wants to prove to her that he won't harm her, and he repeats about 5 times an assertion that he doesn't want to kill Alice.
They were very strange messages, in fact, because she'd never been saying to him, to his face, "I think you're going to kill me or hurt me." So why did he keep saying this to her? And actually, the way we advanced that as a theory was that he was basically saying to her, "These are the things I am going to do to you." You know, he was expressing there what he was thinking, that he was going to hurt her, that he was going to kill her, and that he knew that she would be frightened of that.
Petrified, Alice phones the police and explains what's been happening.
Good evening, Northumbria Police. I can help you.
Hi there. I just need a bit of advice, really, more than anything. So I split up with my boyfriend about 3 months ago. Since then, I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages, even though I've asked him not to contact me. And then tonight, I had a knock at my door. And, he'd sent me a message saying, "I've been in the garden since 5. I had a knock at my door. And then when I went and looked, I've got like a little, the thing that you can look through. And there was no one there. And then it happened again 2 or 3 times. And then he's come round the back, knocked on my bedroom window at the back of my flat, it's a ground floor flat. He's been outside and he's left some flowers and chocolates on the outside windowsill, and he walked off. He's not done anything, but I'm concerned. I've been putting off, my friends have been telling me to call the police. I've been putting it off, but I just feel a bit shaken up tonight.
It can be classed as harassment.
That is fundamentally wrong. At that first opportunity, which may be the only opportunity for us, the police, to get this right, we potentially have set that case on a course towards catastrophe.
For the Director of Police to know, and we can issue them with a PIN notice, which means if he ever comes near you again or contacts you again, he'll be arrested. We'll see if we can make an appointment to come and see you.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah.
We'll get the details.
Thank you.
So the idea is that we'll come and speak to you, Alice, and will go and give him this official document that if he breaches this document, if he breaches, if he contacts you further, then he will be arrested. It sounds really sort of attractive. What it actually does is create this false sense of security.
After this, Alice is reassured. She's been told that if the PIN notice is taken out, if he contacts her again, he'll be arrested, and she believes this. That was on the 1st of October, and in those days that followed, she became happier at work, she regained her vitality. The people at Sky noticed that she was reverting to being her old self. She felt protected. There were issues with how news about the PIN notice got through to him because he's in the military. So the decision was made to have the military tell him about the PIN. He was told about this PIN by his superiors. When he found out, he then, one of his first reactions was to send her a package. And so 7 days later, she receives a package on the 7th of October from him. And it contains, I think, a couple of T-shirts and things she'd left with him up in Edinburgh. It says in the letter to the company, I'm sending you all these things because I've found out that you've gone to the police. He's obviously, you can read between the lines of the letter, he's obviously angry about that.
As Dylan has broken the conditions of the PIN, an official document that forbids Dylan from contacting her, Alice Ruggles calls the police again.
Hi there. I've been in touch with the police. Somebody's been issued with a PIN so that they can't contact me. However, I've had a letter off them.
What was the content of the letter? Was he...
So pictures of me and him, because he's my ex-boyfriend too, a notebook that I'd sent him when we were together and a letter that he knows I called the police on him and he's had everything confiscated and all he has to himself is a pen and paper and an iPod and explaining why he came down last Friday. It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times and he never does seem to stop.
So do you want to call back to discuss this?
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Yeah, what's usually what happens with it?
Okay, well, I'll let them know you want someone to contact you back, just discuss what can be done.
Okay. Will it be the police officer that's been dealing with my case?
I can't guarantee who it'll be. I'll let them know you've got your PIN notice there, so it's going into a breach of it. Is there best time to phone you back?
Any time really will be fine. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
And we don't have a phone call of the callback she eventually received because it was them then calling her. And it was a lady now on the phone, basically at some point said to her, well, what do you expect us to do about it? Arrest him? At that point, it's almost you hear the moment when she suddenly realised she's not being protected. By this stage, Alice is truly frightened of Dylan. Colleagues from Sky are bringing her home every evening to the front door in their cars. Maxine, her flatmate, is with her as much as she can, but obviously there's times when she can't be there.
A few days later, on October 12th, 2016, Maxine, Alice's flatmate, returns home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom, and she's lying covered in blood. She's blue. She's only 23. I mean, knew this was coming. Her ex is an absolute psychopath. She's put in a complaint in about her ex, and she phoned 101 at the weekend to report that he's trying to get in contact and says we're going to do nothing. Now this has happened.
Police teams are dispatched to Alice's home, and detectives are immediately tasked with trying to locate ex-boyfriend Treman Dylan.
By the time we got the horrible call at the door at 2 o'clock the next morning, they'd already arrested him.
October 12, 2016, Northumbria police have located Treman Dylan at his barracks in Edinburgh and are arresting him on suspicion of the murder of his ex-girlfriend Alice Ruggles earlier that evening.
So police had gone into his barracks. They caught him climbing out, attempting to climb out over the wall rather than signing out. We assume this was to go and establish his alibi.
They wore body-worn footage. That body-worn footage showed that he had scratch marks on his face and on his chest, and that those were fresh and recent scratch marks. The footage revealed the police recovering his clothing, outer and underclothing, one item at a time, making sure that it wasn't contaminated.
While Dylan is being held in Newcastle, police are busy gathering CCTV evidence and other forensic evidence in hope of linking him to the murder.
We knew that when the police had gone into the flat, they hadn't been able to find Alice's phone. And that meant that somebody had taken it, because we had seen her on her phone when she arrived back at the flat that afternoon.
Remarkably, they actually have film of Alice arriving home that day, and it transpires that if someone has a cam on their car, then even when they stop the car and turn the engine off, that continues to function for a minute or two. And so it seems that a neighbour's car was parked, and during that minute or two, after the person had left their car, Alice was dropped at home. And so that we actually have a timed video of her arriving for the last time in her flat.
She'd been in contact with her boyfriend using that phone, so somebody had taken it. And the evidence was that the phone was being used, that is, it was connecting with masts, consistent with it travelling north back to Scotland with Tremaine Dillon. And then it stopped being used altogether. But it stopped being used altogether after Alice was dead, after her body had been discovered. So we knew that that phone was with Tremaine Dillon. And that was a really important piece of evidence, because if he was telling the truth, and that he had been caught up in this tragic accident in which Alice had died, why was he stealing her phone? Why was he taking it with him back to Scotland? And why was he trying to use it? What it revealed was that he was still obsessed with who she'd been contacting, who she'd been messaging, and he was wanting to go through her phone and interrogate it.
They picked up on various CCTV cameras that were around the place, pictures of his car coming into Newcastle, driving up her road, and that's how they know that he'd arrived there and was waiting for her. The evidence soon became clear once they got all this from the CCTV. Without a doubt that he'd been there, he'd driven to her road, and later after it happened, he'd driven out of Newcastle. And with the pinging of her phone on the way out of Newcastle, it's absolutely irrefutable.
Dylan initially lies about his whereabouts and concocts multiple stories about where he was.
His first attempt was to say that he'd been shopping. He's then confronted with telephone evidence that shows that he was in Newcastle. So he then constructed his second account, was to say that he had been to the house, he had seen Alice, but that she had come outside, and that she had shouted at him, called him a creep, and scratched his face, and that he'd left. So in that second version, he said he'd left her alive and well, without any injury, and had driven back to Scotland. It was only then, when he was confronted with the fact that her blood was in his car, on his Help for Heroes bracelet, and on his clothing, that he came up with his third version of events, which was to say that Alice had accidentally killed herself with a knife in the bathroom of her home.
Dylan is formally charged with Alice's murder. From the evidence collected, investigators can now tell how the last terrifying moments of Alice's life played out.
Alice is in the living room, happily WhatsApping with Mike, in fact, because they were due to meet in 2 days. Mike was coming over. And sort of Mike's they were exchanging all this stuff about what they're going to do and all the rest of it. And then suddenly Alice's messages stopped.
He came in through the rear yard of the property and climbed in through a window. The disturbance in the bedroom suggests that Alice had seen him there, and there had been some sort of struggle in the bedroom. And the way the flat was configured, she had run for the bathroom, which of course is the only room in the flat that had a lockable door. It was at the back of the flat. So it was a place of safety, but it was unfortunately a dead end. She got into the bathroom, and there was a footprint mark on the outside of the bathroom door and some damage to the lock. And what all that suggested was that she'd got herself into the bathroom. She'd tried to lock the door while she was being pursued by Dylan, but that he had kicked the door open, forcing the lock, and then he had attacked her inside the bathroom. Dylan had knelt on her back, pulled back her hair and slit her throat, and had been drawn so deeply and with such force across her neck that in fact her spinal cord at the back of the neck had been notched by the knife.
Dylan's trial starts in April 2017. In preparation, investigators have found more digital evidence and also ex-partners of Dylan's that tell a story of jealous behaviour, control and stalking.
They all spoke of a similar pattern of behaviour, that he would form a relationship very quickly, that there would be a great intensity to that relationship, but that he would become controlling during the relationship, and that he could not cope with rejection.
He already had a legal framework in place to control and regulate his behaviour towards an ex-partner.
On the 10th of October, unbeknown to anyone at the time, he drove all the way down from his barracks, 120 miles down to Newcastle, 2-hour journey, and went after dark to her back window and photographed those windows in her flat, and then drove all the way back to Newcastle, 5-hour round journey.
I think that Harry Dillon thought that he would take his chances, that there was a chance that a jury might believe his story, that there was a chance he might be able to charm them, and so that's what he set out to do. And so we presented a very clear and compelling case. We demonstrated all of the false accounts that he'd given, and we demonstrated to the jury just how controlling and manipulative he was. But he gave evidence over the course of 5 days. He was giving evidence. 2.5 days to his advocate and 2.5 days in cross-examination. And in cross-examination, we exposed his account for the lie that it was. And we demonstrated through cross-examination just how manipulative, controlling and obsessive he was. And in fact, his evidence at trial was all an exercise in control. It was all about exerting control over Alice's family until the bitter end, taunting them effectively and tormenting them. But worse than that, it was about him saying to Alice's family, "This is your fault. If you hadn't interfered in our relationship, she would still be alive." He actually said to Alice's father at one point, "You couldn't be there to protect your daughter."
It takes the jury less than 2 hours to return a verdict.
The jury retired shortly before the lunch adjournment, and then they came back early in the afternoon and unanimously convicted Harry Dillon. His reaction to being convicted was one of a complete lack of emotion, but that's what he displayed throughout. He spent 2.5 days describing to the jury in graphic detail how this woman who he supposedly loved had bled to death in front of him. Not once did he cry, come close to shedding a tear, show any emotion.
The judge pointed out that he lied from the beginning to the end, that it was patently clear that he'd gone along intending to murder Alice.
Harry Dillon was sentenced to life imprisonment, and the judge made a recommendation that he should serve no less than 23 years in prison before he could be considered for parole.
After this justified result, what could have been different?
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
The family looking back may have thought, could we have done something else? Could we have stopped this? But Dylan was a maniac. He had full intent that night to come down and murder Alice, and he has still not admitted guilt for the murder that he committed, so he is still maintaining control.
I think there's still an enormous amount of ignorance about stalking and about how dangerous stalking is, about what it says about the person who's committing the offence. To get to the point where you're stalking a person in the way that Dylan was stalking Alice demonstrates that you have such disturbed thinking and such an enhanced sense of self-entitlement that you're becoming extremely dangerous. And I think we need to have much tougher sentences for stalkers. I think we need to take stalking much more seriously. And there needs to be a far deeper intervention with these people who commit these offences to stop them going on, as sadly happens, to commit murders such as this one.
What is changing to avoid more incidents like this from happening?
There has been lessons learned from Alice's murder, mandatory training for officers, for victim support staff in stalking, and training for people to understand the way stalkers behave and what increases the danger to victims.
Increasingly, the public are becoming more aware of stalking and its risks. The publicity around cases has grown in recent years. Awareness in agencies has grown. There were some national recommendations. At the time of Alice's case, the threat to disclose intimate photographs was not a specific criminal offence, so we've made a recommendation around that. That is now in legislation.
Clive and Sue set up the Alice Ruggles Trust to raise awareness of the dangers of stalking.
We had to do something so that people didn't end up in the same position that we were in, giving poor advice to their family members and then watching them being murdered. That second phone call to the police could have saved Alice if they'd arrested him. And we wanted lessons to be learned. How do we make sure that lessons are learned from this? And it sort of made us realise that that's our job now, to make sure that lessons are learned from it. I spend quite a lot of my time talking to people about the last few months of Alice's life. And I have to make a really big effort to think that Alice's life was not just about those last few months. And that I really want to remember Alice for all the positive things rather than just really horrific things.
Dallas, Texas. Police are called to a garage in a high-end apartment complex. A body has been found.
It was almost like an execution-style murder. I mean, she had no warning that this was coming.
The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
But the profile of the victim and the manner of death lead investigators to believe that this is more than a random shooting.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
What detectives soon uncover is a complex conspiracy.
Just the lengths that someone would go to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend.
I don't think she even thought about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Unfortunately, there are people in this world who would kill another human being and not give it a second thought.
This is the story of the tragic murder of Kendra Hatcher, the detailed and methodical search for her killer, and a motive which police soon learn was triggered by jealousy and rage. It's just after 8 p.m. on the evening of September 2nd, 2015. Police respond to a 911 call from a luxurious high-rise apartment building in Dallas's Uptown.
Dallas 911, what is emergency?
Hi, someone just got shot in the parking lot of the Gables Park 17. All I heard was screaming and then a loud pop, and then I saw her laying on the floor and it was like blood coming out of her neck. The people, they had a mask on, and I think it was a black Jeep Cherokee.
I responded to that and was told by the officers that were securing the scene outside that there was someone that was deceased inside of the parking lot.
I saw a white Toyota Camry pulled in a parking space. The driver's side of the vehicle, the victim was laying on the ground. There was a pool of blood around her head.
She was dressed in black doctor's scrubs, and her name was embroidered on the front of her shirt.
It was definite that she had been shot. Next to the body, there was a magazine from a handgun, a spent round, and a shell casing.
The police request the attendance of the medical examiner.
The medical examiner did arrive at the scene, and he was able to confirm that she was deceased from one gunshot wound to the head. The bullet entered in the back of her skull and actually came out underneath her chin area.
The police have already been able to confirm the identity of the deceased.
The officers, prior to my arrival, checked the license plate on the car, and that came back as Kendra Hatcher being the owner of the vehicle, which matched what was on her shirt also.
Detectives now begin to examine what evidence they can find.
The cell phone at the scene was given to the homicide investigators. Obviously, they wanted to find out what numbers had been recently called or dialed on that phone, what messages had come in. The pistol magazine, which was also found at the scene with 13 live rounds in it, I took back to our crime scene lab and processed for latent prints.
We looked for her purse, and we found out that her purse was missing. And so we just began doing our normal course of investigation, looking for witnesses and also video cameras inside the parking garage.
Officers establish Kendra Hatcher's last movements.
I found out that Kendra was actually a resident in that building and that she was on her way home from work. September 2nd was her last day at work for a few days because she was going on a vacation.
Kendra's fiancé, Ricardo Ricky Paniagua, soon arrives.
One of the most painful parts of this whole story that I think of is that Ricky, the fiancé, was coming back into the apartment complex with dinner, and there was something going on. There were like police ropes and sirens and things were going on. He didn't know what was going on.
After speaking with him for a couple minutes, Ricky was able to tell me that him and Kendra had been dating for several months, and he was meeting Kendra at her apartment that evening to have dinner. Once he found out that we found Kendra deceased, you could just see just the color go from his body. He almost went into a state of shock once he was able to connect the dots.
Police begin to piece together more information about Kendra.
She had a very humble life growing up. Her mother owned a blanket shop in Springfield, Illinois. She was a cheerleader in high school. And she also was very devoted to her religion.
She was a rising star in her world of dentistry. She was someone that helped many, many people.
She worked with a clinic in the mid-cities of between Dallas and Fort Worth that specialized in lower-income kids because she wanted to help kids.
She also volunteered her time giving back to poor children in South America, donating her abilities as a dentist and her time and her effort to help kids that couldn't afford dentistry.
In recent months, Ricky and Kendra have become very close.
She had told her family that she was super excited about meeting this guy. She said that they're clicking and that, he's a dermatologist and that they would probably end up moving in a year or so after his residency ended. And she just seemed to be really super happy and excited about life.
The most immediate clue to what has happened to Kendra comes from the footage captured on the apartment complex's security camera system.
On the surveillance footage, we were able to see the victim come in to the parking garage and go to a normal parking space. We also found a footage of an older model Jeep Cherokee. This Jeep Cherokee was waiting in the visitor portion of the parking garage, and they followed another vehicle in and parked in a parking space before our victim got there.
She started to get out of her car. An assailant walked up and basically executed her, shot her in the head, took her purse, and fled.
The individual walked back to the back seat of the Jeep. The Jeep went out the wrong direction in the parking garage, made a U-turn, and then they exited.
But there are limitations to what the police can see on the CCTV.
After looking at the video, there was no way we could tell what kind of license plate was on that vehicle. And we had information that it may have been a paper tag.
Police feel the public might be able to help them.
They made the decision to release that tape to the public and say, hey, has anybody seen this vehicle, or do you know what's going on, or this is, this is very much of interest to us. And I think that was very, very key for them because that helped move the case along.
I felt like there was more to the story. There was no random circumstance that caused this murder, that they were there for a specific reason and they were waiting on our victim.
Police have some security footage, a murdered woman and a distraught fiancé. But they have little else to point to a motive for what clearly is the clinical killing of Kendra Hatcher. Dallas, Texas, 2015. Police are investigating the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Most of the incident has been caught on security footage. Detectives have released the tape publicly in the hopes it might elicit a response and information. It does.
The media interest, it did help the case, obviously. I mean, when the news footage of the Jeep Cherokee leaving the garage, that jump-started the investigation when the owner called in.
The man is Jose Luis Ortiz, and he claims he lent his Jeep to a friend, Brenda Delgado.
Jose called in and said that he loaned his Jeep the same day of the murder to Brenda Delgado. Jose actually gave us a phone number for Brenda, and we called her. She told us, I'm house sitting for a friend over in Irving, and I don't have a ride, but if you can come pick me up, I'll come talk with you.
With this connection to the vehicle, Brenda Delgado immediately becomes a person of interest. Detectives try to establish more about her and her background.
Her parents immigrated from Mexico to America, so she still had dual citizenship in both countries. They were good working class folks. She graduated from an area high school. There wasn't money to go to college, so she started working. She got interested in the dental field. She was coming back to school and slowly finishing dental hygienist school when she was in her 30s.
The interesting thing about Brenda Delgado is that she is the former girlfriend of Ricky, the fiancé of Kendra Hatcher.
She had been with Mr. Paniagua several times, dating him. They broke it off. He then met Kendra Hatcher.
Brenda was, by all means, crazy in love with him, fascinated by him. They met the first time, got together, had a relationship. He broke it off. And then at some point after that, they started to get together casually. I would assume that meant they were probably hooking up, but it wasn't anything more. It wasn't a romantic relationship or a long-term relationship.
However, Brenda doesn't see things that way.
There were times where she would seem emotionally unstable. There would be times where she would be overly clingy and just kind of overly attached to him. And I felt like, that kind of fit in with the theme on this case, more so than a robbery.
It appears her view of the relationship has become obsessive.
He would be out for a run on Katy Trail here in Dallas, and she would suddenly run into him, make it appear that it was coincidental when in fact it wasn't. She was stalking him. So I think at that point she was just obsessed and she wanted to get him back any way she could.
For police, it's time to get face-to-face with Brenda Delgado.
Brenda gets called in for a voluntary interview, and she's cooperative. The Dallas police, smart as a bug, those folks taped everything.
Brenda gives the detectives her version of how she spent Wednesday, September 2nd, the day Kendra Hatcher was murdered.
Wednesday, I was in Carrollton, and I studied from maybe 12 all the way to about 6 And then from 6 we went to Fuzzy's. We had some tacos at Fuzzy's in Carrollton.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Who were you studying with?
Billy, this guy, a classmate.
Okay. So how'd you get to Carrollton?
I got a ride to Carrollton.
Okay. Who gave you a ride?
Who gave me a ride? My friend, Crystal.
Crystal?
Mm-hmm.
She told me that early that morning she met up with her friend Crystal. They were having some problems with their vehicle, and she took it to Jose's shop. Jose's a mechanic. Jose looked at it and told her that he needed to work on it, and she borrowed his Jeep. She said that she had a study date that day with some friends, and Crystal dropped her off at a public library, and she spent most of the day studying. She also told me that the library had cameras, and it also had a sign-in log that I could check for her signature.
This level of detail immediately raises a red flag.
Most people don't pay attention to locations having cameras or sign-in logs. It was like it was already pre-formatted.
Brenda can also supply very specific details about where she was at the time of Kendra's death.
And I go to Chili's.
How'd you get to the Chili's?
Billy took me.
Billy gave you a ride at Chili's?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have the receipt in my bag. I can tell you exactly the time I closed down.
Okay.
She probably figured if she just showed the receipt, an officer would say, sure, you weren't there, thank you, and that would be over. Fortunately, that's not the way it works in the world of crime.
Most people, when they come down and talk about murder, they're really nervous and kind of taken back. Either they're going to be overwhelmed emotionally because someone lost their life. They're going to be afraid because they're being questioned at a homicide investigation. She didn't seem to match any of those descriptions. She was very cool, calm, and collected, and very organized.
Detectives begin to get more specific with Delgado.
This is the picture of the young lady that got killed. Never seen her before?
I've never seen her.
Okay.
First, they started with Kendra Hatcher. Do you know this person? No, I've never met her. Well, she's engaged to Ricky Patiago. Do you know him? Oh, well, yes, Ricky and I are very close, but we're just friends now.
Detective Barnes needs to find out more about the vehicle used when the murder occurred.
I began to press her on who would have this Jeep. So when I pressed her on her location and whether she was driving the Jeep, she pointed a finger at Crystal and said, you need to talk with her.
Detectives now bring Brenda's friend Crystal Cortez in for questioning.
So she is in the police headquarters at the same time Brenda is, and they're interviewing both of them, taping both of them, and then super helpful for information back and forth.
There was a lot of different stories from Crystal. The first version was that she was looking for a parking space because she was going out to eat in a nearby restaurant. And she just happened to park inside the parking garage at the Gables 17. And she heard a loud noise and decided to leave the parking garage.
When I was up there, I heard a shot. I have my son in the back. So I said, no, you know what? Let me get out. I'm coming out. There's a guy running with a mask right in front of me. He stops. He looks dead at me. And I'm just like, horrid. I'm shaking literally at this point because I have my son in the back.
I confronted her with the fact that I actually saw someone get out of her vehicle and walk towards Dr. Hatcher.
Immediately, Crystal's story changes.
Crystal starts making up stories about she was just driving along the park with her son, and this scary man jumped in and told her to drive or he was going to kill her. And then she drove to the apartment complex and had no idea what happened.
However, she's confronted with the fact that there's no sign of anyone who could be considered to be her son on the tape.
Who else was in the vehicle with you?
Just my son, and he was asleep in the back, honestly.
No. That's not going to work either. I want to be able to trust you, and I want to be able to believe you. And I know that what you're telling me is not true.
She switched up the story to be this friend of Brenda's and her drove into the apartment complex, and the motive was going to be robbery, and then she was just going to drive the getaway car, and they were going to be away with some money, and she was going to get $500, and they were going to scare Kendra.
But Crystal Cortez has done no more than implicate herself.
When Crystal admitted that Brenda paid her $500 to go to the parking garage, with this unknown male who was armed with a firearm. She self-admitted she put herself at the crime scene. That was enough to charge her. We charged her with capital murder.
Meanwhile, Brenda is still being interviewed by detectives.
The more I watched Brenda Delgado, the more I just knew she was lying. They kept the film running when they would leave the room or do you want to take a bathroom break or do you want some snacks or whatever. So they were friendly to her, but there would be times when she was on camera by herself, the detectives were out of the room, talking to Crystal Cortez. She was just like, oh. And she was doing things like this, and I think she was realizing the trouble that she had stepped into and that what was happening while the detectives were interviewing her.
Agent Barnes now turns up the heat on Delgado.
I began pressing Brenda really hard about where she was at, what she was doing, and why they were there, and what they were there for. And I think that once I began pressing buttons, Brenda felt like she was going to unravel and end up being charged. And she just asked for an attorney.
Brenda clearly hasn't been to the scene of the murder. Detectives don't have enough evidence to charge her, but instinctively they know she is involved in some way.
They felt they did not have enough to issue a warrant for arrest for murder, but they wanted to hold her. They ran her background check, and she had a whole bunch of parking violations, enough to be arrested.
Collectively, we decided it would be better to just put her in jail for her traffic tickets than to charge her with murder and have to release her if we couldn't find enough details to prove it at that point.
But Brenda has other plans.
As soon as somebody comes down here, or she on her own, pays the $300 or $400 that's owed, whatever's the fine that's not paid, as soon as you pay that, they release you immediately. And so it's not like you're sticking them in jail on some kind of a serious charge where they're going to have to wait and see a judge, and you're going to have to go through at least an 18-hour process. You're putting her in there. She's going to be out potentially in a couple, 2 to 4 hours, which she was.
We found out that she left jail, she called a taxi to a local hospital, and she called her father and asked her father to pick her up.
Within hours, Brenda Delgado flees the state and crosses the border into Mexico.
She already had her backup plan in place, and at that point, we were just playing catch-up.
Detectives now believe that Brenda Delgado is at the center of the murder of Kendra Hatcher.
All of the early indicators on this investigation seem to point back to Brenda. Jose didn't know Kendra. Crystal didn't know Kendra. It all pointed back at Brenda. Brenda had the motive to want Kendra dead.
In Dallas, Texas, police are hunting for Brenda Delgado, a suspect in the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Delgado has fled to Mexico, but investigators are continuing to question Crystal Cortez, Delgado's accomplice, who drove the Jeep from which the killer emerged to shoot Kendra. However, they are still trying to identify the shooter.
Just crunching down phone records between Brenda, Crystal. We also located a phone inside Brenda's apartment. We got phone records for that number, and all of these phones had a common phone number that they were communicating with. And we were able to locate that phone number and do some subpoenas for the phone records on that phone.
Police reach out to federal agencies for assistance.
The FBI got involved about a month after it happened. At the time, they hadn't identified the shooter in the case. They only knew him as Chris, so they were looking for help in that regard. They had a telephone number for Chris. We were able to obtain a search warrant to obtain the real-time location information associated with that phone. The pings on the phone brought us to an apartment complex in South Dallas.
That same day, Crystal is brought in for further questioning.
So there was the blue Sebring part right there.
Okay, was it an older looking Sebring?
No, this is like, it's your, maybe
like this color blue or dark blue?
No. It's a shiny blue.
She gives me a description of the shooter's car. and she said he drives a blue Chrysler Sebring. I picked my phone up and I called the FBI agents that were doing surveillance out in this parking lot and gave them the car description, and they told me that they see the car in the same parking lot. By watching the phone pings, they noticed the phone started moving, and they also noticed that the blue Chrysler Sebring was moving at the same time that the cell phone was moving. And it pulls over in a parking lot a couple blocks away from this apartment complex, and they walk up to him and make contact.
The man is Christopher Love. He is taken into custody and the car is impounded.
The car was towed to the auto pound, and I began interviewing Christopher Love. I interviewed him all the way through the course of the night into the early morning hours of October 2nd.
Searching the car, they didn't really find anything, and it was a little bit of a dead end.
Detectives have drawn a blank, so they turn to another police resource to intensify the investigation.
A canine that was in training at the time was brought to the Dallas Auto Pound. The canine had been trained to find explosives. That could be anywhere from gunpowder to bomb material C4.
They sniffed the car. The dog wisely stopped at a couple places. They found some residue, but they didn't find enough evidence yet. And then the dog zoomed in on the console in between the driver's and passenger seat, up one side and down the other. So that was super helpful. The investigators were able to remove the panel, and lo and behold, what's in there? A gun.
Christopher Love is confronted with what the canine has managed to uncover.
Once I showed him a picture of the firearm, it was like somebody letting the air out of a balloon. His body language, he just kind of sunk down in his chair. His head dropped. He tells me, okay. I was there. I was with Crystal. I got out of the Jeep to walk over to get Kendra's purse, and Crystal fired a shot from the Jeep out the window, and it hit Kendra. And he goes back into the Jeep, and they drive away.
But Detective Barnes knows better.
I saw the video, and what he was describing was a scene out of a James Bond movie. There was no way that Crystal could throw the car in reverse, shoot out a passenger window while backing up, hit someone in the head, and one shot get it done. And also the magazine to the firearm was laying next to the body. So I knew that my shooter was there, close range, and standing beside Kendra whenever she died. There's a video camera from the parking garage on the other side. That's how I know which side of the vehicle you got out of, and only one person got out of that vehicle.
I hopped in the driver's seat.
That one person that got out, the one person that got out of that vehicle was you. I actually pressed him a little bit about being the shooter, and when he didn't feel like there was any way out, and there's no way to explain it other than to tell the truth, he asked for a lawyer. Well, I can tell you, man, that as far as this thing goes, that and so once he terminated the interview, I went back to my desk and began typing his murder warrant, capital murder warrant, and he knocked on the door again. He wanted to sit and talk with me, and I told him I had to read his Miranda warning again if he wanted to talk, and he said okay. And he just wanted to ask me one question. He wanted to know, why did we let Brenda go? I thought it was pretty significant. I thought that was him saying, hey, you got me, now I want you to get her.
Crystal Cortez is also bowing to the inevitable.
I really want to go home to my baby.
You're not trying to cover for
No, I'm not covering anybody. I don't want nothing to do with this. I want to go home now. I really do. I want to go to my baby, okay?
I understand that.
I'm helping you guys with everything I can. I just want to go home to Ivan, okay? I know you guys are trying to help me. I'm trying to help you out. I'm not trying to cover for anybody.
So Crystal was charged with capital murder. At some point, she agreed to a deal. The deal was, if you are truthful and if you can testify against Brenda, we will recommend you for 35 years to life, but you will be pleading guilty to capital murder.
They needed Crystal to get to Brenda. It's the only opportunity for her. 17 and a half years, you're eligible for parole. You may or may not get it, but you're eligible. She's got a child. She's got to be thinking about a whole lot of things, and she doesn't want to be locked up till the day she dies.
She was the one that kind of put the pieces together for law enforcement, kind of explained what happened and allowed law enforcement to arrest the other people that were involved in it.
Detectives know they have Crystal and Christopher, but now the spotlight turns to Brenda Delgado. They strongly suspect that she has manipulated the other two.
One of the things that I learned working this case, that Brenda was very good at reading people. She was able to sit down with someone, figure out who that person was, figure out where they were at in life, and specifically what they needed in life.
It was a business transaction for them. Should we beat him up? Should we kill her? Should we... they just handled it as if it was business.
She actually offered Crystal $500. At the time, Crystal was a single mother. She was out of work because her vehicle wasn't working, and she needed some mechanic work done to her vehicle, and she didn't have the money to get it done. Brenda was able to figure out that she needed money to be able to go to work every day and take care of her child, and so she just kind of dangled that carrot in front of Crystal to get her to participate in this murder.
And it is becoming apparent that Brenda had lied to Christopher in order to manipulate him even further.
Christopher Love was a self-proclaimed low-level drug dealer that just moved to this Dallas area, and he wanted to be Scarface. He was looking forward to being the next up-and-coming drug dealer in Dallas, and Brenda picked up on that, and that's what she offered him. She told Christopher that she was part of the drug cartel, and that Kendra was actually stealing drugs from the cartel, and if he participated in this murder, that he'd get a lifetime supply of drugs.
At the center of everything appears to be Brenda's jealousy of Ricky's newfound happiness with Kendra.
I think her obsession with Kendra Hatcher and losing Dr. Paniagua was stronger than anything she could think of. She just had one goal in mind, and that was to either hurt Dr. Paniagua, which was one of the very first things that came into their minds, or remove Kendra Hatcher from the picture.
On Brenda's phone, we looked into the notes portion of her phone, and we found an email address for Ricardo and also a password. Based on our interviews with Crystal told us that Brenda was able to track Ricardo, and she was able to know where he was at.
When Ricky and Brenda were hooking up the second time around, Ricky was still helping her, so they had a joint cell phone account, and apparently that account gave her access to his phone online. She had put tracking software on his phone. She was able to know where that phone was, where he was.
She would find his location, and she would go and watch him. And then she would go have casual encounters where she would randomly bump into him and have conversations with him.
And her obsession also extended to Kendra.
In Brenda's phone, she had a bunch of pictures and videos she downloaded from Kendra's Facebook page. She had been stalking Ricardo and Kendra at the same time, just kind of staying up with their relationship. And I think she used social media as a way just to kind of figure out what they were doing.
It is becoming clear that Brenda was going to do whatever it took to achieve her objective.
Not only had she approached Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love, we interviewed some people that she had approached before about trying to convince them to do the same thing. Namely, her cousin, having him attack Kendra Hatcher with a baseball bat. He ultimately declined to do so. So she had been trying to find someone who would carry this out for some time.
Crystal had got in deep and was doing what Brenda wanted.
And speaking with Crystal, she told me that she started going around just talking to people that they knew about, where they could get a gun, and also if they would be willing to help them in this murder. And through a mutual friend, a gentleman by the name of Kelly Ellis, Kelly knew Christopher Love, and he introduced them.
For whatever reason, they just fell in, and the ball started rolling, and Crystal started agreeing to these things, and she found a shooter for Brenda. She agreed to drive the getaway vehicle. She helped Brenda get rid of evidence after the fact for $500 and some drugs.
Delgado was across the border, in her mind, safe from the authority of U.S. law enforcement.
My arrest authority ends in the state of Texas, and I think Brenda knew that. She felt like she was out of reach of the Dallas Police Department, but what she didn't plan for was that we have a partnership with the FBI, and they've got worldwide jurisdiction.
When people try to flee the U.S. to another country to escape justice, that always is a thorn in my side. So I always give those cases a little extra attention because I want to make sure that these people get caught and brought back to the U.S. I don't want people thinking that they can flee our borders and not answer the charges that are brought against them.
The FBI felt like the longer that she was free, the longer that she was evading law enforcement, that we were at risk for her committing another offense.
Dallas police now move to make Brenda Delgado an international fugitive from justice.
We were able to get her on the FBI most wanted list. I was pretty excited about it because I knew that I would get my shot at her again.
In 2016, Dallas police and the FBI are continuing their investigation into the murder of 35-year-old dentist Kendra Hatcher. Investigators have apprehended the man who pulled the trigger, Christopher Love, and the getaway driver, Crystal Cortez. However, they are still searching for the woman they believe orchestrated the crime, Brenda Delgado, who is a fugitive in Mexico and on the FBI's most wanted list. Detectives and agents now intensify their search for Delgado.
We started interviewing extended family members to see if we could get any cooperation from them. Initially, we weren't successful. They didn't want to cooperate, but ultimately some of them did. And that was very helpful in ultimately locating her.
I believe the phone was instrumental in tracking. They were able to pick up who she was calling and where money transfers were being made for her to have money to live on out there.
We received information that her family was sending her money via some money transfer business, and we were able to corroborate some of that. We saw some money going down to a state in Mexico where we knew she had relatives.
This information is further corroborated by a tip directly to investigators.
We received information that Brenda was at a specific location in Mexico, and the tipster began providing detailed information of where Brenda was at.
It allowed us to identify her exact location in Mexico, and we relayed that to Mexican Interpol officers, and they arrested her, within hours after we passed on that information.
Texas authorities moved to extradite Brenda Delgado from Mexico to the United States.
It's a long process to do that. I mean, our State Department has to reach out to whoever's the comparable authority in Mexico City. I mean, I don't remember how long that process took, but 6 months to a year. I mean, it was a good while.
For the process to work, certain conditions must be met.
Brenda was a dual citizen, Mexico citizenship and American citizenship. And Mexico has a standing policy that they do not extradite any of their nationals, any of their citizens, into a death penalty situation.
The deal was that she would not be put to death here in the States. So in order for us to apprehend her and bring her back, we had to agree to that.
We flew to Mexico on October 5th of 2016. We met Mexican authorities in a hangar at the airport. We searched her. We placed the restraints on her that she would be wearing on the flight. We were able to board the flight before any of the other passengers through the back entrance and flew back to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport nonstop.
I actually met her when she arrived here. I was the first face that she saw when she walked in the airport hangar. I'm a pretty competitive person, and even though I didn't get a chance to interview her again, in my mind, I was like, I told you I was going to get you.
Prosecutors now need to prepare for 3 trials: Brenda Delgado, Crystal Cortez, and Christopher Love.
I've been working in the Dallas Homicide Unit for a little over 9 years. And out of every murderer that I've come across, Christopher Love is about as cold as any murderer that I've dealt with. No sign of remorse, no sign of emotion, no sign of regret.
This is a vicious, vicious, vicious person.
Christopher Love was sentenced to death. He's still on death row from what I understand, and I don't know if a date's been set yet for that.
Crystal Cortez's fate has already been more or less agreed.
Crystal was charged with capital murder as well, based on her agreement to testify against Christopher and also to testify against Brenda. She was given 35 years in prison.
In the case of Brenda Delgado, prosecutors paint a picture of a ruthless manipulator.
They did a great job at pointing out the specific facts of this investigation and just kind of like laying out who Brenda was. You know, that she's not just this pretty face that you see sitting in a courtroom, that this lady's a monster.
I don't think she even thought much about covering her tracks. It was all about getting this done. This focus of, I need to get Kendra Hatcher out of the way so I can get Ricky back.
Brenda had a very blank look on her face, almost like she was in disbelief that she was actually sitting in this courtroom and that she was being held accountable for what she did.
I don't really know that she felt right and wrong. I don't really know that she felt any guilt. The best word I can come up with is sociopathic.
She just appeared to be very nonchalant and like everything was okay, and it would be until the very end.
When the jury deliberate, they aren't long about coming to a decision.
So I was going down the escalator, and this is, we're less than 20 minutes since the jury went out, and I get a text message, we've got a verdict.
I think we startled some folks. We came back in a half an hour. It was not flippant, however. It was not off the cuff. We came back into the jury room, and someone suggested that we take a sample vote. This is the gut check vote. Let's just write down what we think, and then we'll start talking about it. So a woman volunteered to capture the notes. We all wrote down what we thought, and she opened them up, and they were all in one pile, one after the other. Guilty, 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 guilty.
That's very unusual. In a capital murder case, for the jury to come back, I heard estimates of 18 to 20 minutes that they deliberated. Yeah, that's unheard of. So they were convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed this crime. First and foremost, this was a Dallas Police Department homicide investigation. And everybody understood their roles, and everybody understood that the primary goal was to identify everybody who was involved in this murder for hire and to get everybody arrested and in a courtroom to face the charges against them. And I think every agency did a great job at that.
I think working cases like this just makes it hard for you to trust individuals. But on a positive note, it's kind of offset by all the positives that I learned from working with the family and also the detectives on this case.
There may be a victory of sorts in the convictions, but for the family of Kendra Hatcher, there is just loss.
The thing that bothered me the most about this case was this could have been anyone. Kendra is a truly innocent victim, and she never saw any of this coming. For her to be ambushed and assassinated in a parking garage like an animal, it bothered me. And it is one of those things that you just never forget.
It's such a senseless, tragic loss of life that didn't need to happen. Just the lengths that someone would go to to try to get back with an ex-boyfriend. That's very chilling, and it's a stark reminder of kind of the world we live in.
Nothing anyone can do will bring Kendra Hatcher back, and for her family, the pain of losing her endures.
For the family, I don't feel there's closure. The word is a great word. We hear it and we think curtains are shut and we can no longer see what's behind them. But I do not believe that there is true closure in a case like this.
Their daughter, sister, was taken from them in an instant, without any warning and without any reason. So I don't know how you come to terms with that. It's got to be extremely difficult.
We can never bring back Kendra, but we can say, hey, we got the people that were responsible.